This is BBC News broadcasting live to viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Yelda Hakim, coming to you live from Ukraine's western city of Lviv. Our top stories. World leaders condemn the attack on Europe's largest nuclear power plant. It is now secure. Ukraine's president accuses Moscow of nuclear terror.
We need to stop the Russian military immediately. Scream to your politicians. Ukraine is 15 nuclear units. If there is an explosion, it is the end of everything.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says the reactor wasn't hit and no radioactive material has been released. But the UK Foreign Secretary says those behind the attack need to be held accountable.
We've called for an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council. This is a threat to European security and stability, and we need those responsible to be held to account.
Meanwhile, Mariupol in the south of Ukraine has become a city under siege as power and water supplies are cut off by relentless Russian shelling. More than 1 million civilians have fled Ukraine. The EU says up to 4 million may try to leave and that it will welcome all refugees with open arms. Hello and welcome to our viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Yelda Hakim for this special edition of the ongoing war and crisis in Ukraine, here from the western city of Lviv. Let's just bring you up to date on the latest situation here in the country. Russian forces have seized Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant station after shelling it overnight, which caused a fire. The authorities say the power plant site is secure and radiation levels are now normal. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry says several people have been killed and injured. Ukraine's energy minister has also told the BBC that Ukrainian staff are still running the plant, with Russian forces having surrounded the site. Now, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is in the southeast of Ukraine. It's the biggest in Europe, and President Zelensky has accused Moscow of resorting to nuclear terror and urged Russians to protest. Russia escalated its air campaign against Ukrainian cities on Thursday and through the night into Friday. We start our coverage with this report from our correspondent, James Waterhouse.
In these times, what happens in one part of Ukraine is instantly seen by the rest of it. Shells landing on Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, the latest to horrify this besieged country and the wider world. Emergency crews said they put the fire out at Zaporizhzhia and that the nuclear reactors are safe. It's now, however, in Russian hands. We're told staff are still being allowed to do their jobs.
Russian troops attacked the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It's maybe 6 times the size of Chernobyl. The Russian tanks knew what they were firing at. They directly hit the plant. This is terror on an unprecedented level.
In nearby Yelda, the mayor says war crimes have been witnessed. Claims of an armoured convoy of 100 Russian vehicles shooting at people who came in its path. This Russian advance from the south is making gains, and Mariupol is feeling its force. It continues to be under siege, under heavy bombardment. Authorities have described a genocide and want NATO troops to help.
The situation from humanitarian side is terrible because city lives for 3 days without any supplement, without any electricity, water, sanitary system, heating system.
Chernihiv in the north has been partly turned to rubble by airstrikes. 47 people are known to have been killed.
My parents live right here, nearby. It's hard for me to speak. This is a nightmare. How is it possible? Just look at this. It's a residential building. A friend of mine lives here with her children. Luckily, they managed to get out.
In eastern Kyiv, warehouses flattened by Russian shells. You could hear the continuous rumblings of this attack from the centre.
Just over a week ago, you would often see crowds outside the Opera House to enjoy an evening of the arts, maybe some kind of performance. Now, all you really see, crowd-wise, while queues outside the few pharmacies that are still open.
The Russians claim their attack is going to plan. A plan apparently meant to not target cities or civilians. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kyiv.
Well, let's speak now to our chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet, who joins me live from Kyiv. And Lyse, I mean, to think 9 days ago, Ukraine and Kyiv was a different city, a different place. How much changes in that time when there's a war that erupts?
Well, from where we're standing, Yelda, I can still see the Ukrainian flag snapping in the wind, but beyond that, this city is now unrecognizable. Life has dropped underground. I look down the streets below, there's a few cars. I look, but they're emptied of people. In the apartment block next door, there's not a light, not a face at the window. Life is lived underground in the basements and the bunkers and the bomb shelters. And I have to say that in these last 2 days, and even in these last few hours, there is a constant barrage of explosions, Russian attacks on this city. They're still on the edges, but in some places they're about 10 to 15 miles where we are now. There was one explosion today, much closer in the city. And of course, there is that long armored convoy on the very edge of the city, which puts the whole city on edge. We're still hearing that it hasn't moved very far. It hasn't, in fact, moved for the past few days. There are reports that it could be having supply problems, that it could be meeting staunch resistance from the Ukrainian forces, but it still sits there like a threat while people of this city watch with horror what is happening, the destruction and the suffering being inflicted on cities to the north, to the south, and to the east.
Indeed, as you say, Lyse, it's almost like this horror as they feel like their city is being surrounded. Are people able to get out of Kyiv if they want? Certainly here in Lviv, we're seeing people come from across the country, and some people from the capital.
Yes, we saw images yesterday of the train station is like been transformed into a makeshift parking lot because people are rushing to the train station when there are trains. They leave their car there as they leave their lives behind, fearing that they maybe sometime and maybe never they'll be able to come back to their homes again. And they're jumping on the trains out of the city. The trains are still running. They do get in their cars to take to the road. They get into minibuses, but some of the roads are shut, and we've seen horrific videos from just the outskirts, mainly to the northwest of this city, of the kind of blackened buildings, smoldering ruins, whole streets and neighborhoods laid to waste under incessant and indiscriminate Russian shelling. The kind of images, sadly, which are all too reminiscent of what we saw in Syria in 2016. So there's war on the outskirts, which people have to plan very carefully, and people are making decisions. Should I take my family on the road and risk possibly being caught up in fighting or being stopped along the way? Or do I just stay underground in some of these shelters? The shelters in the subway stations, for example, were built, the metro stations, beautiful mosaics and marble stairways, but they also were built in the 1960s during the Cold War as bomb shelters, a possible attack from the West when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And here they're taking to these shelters fearing a possible attack by Russian forces. So people are going deep underground and saying, whatever happens, and God knows what will happen to this city, I'll be safe where I am, but who knows for how long.
Lyse, as you say, difficult decisions there for families, whether they stay or go, or whether they are torn apart, and those sorts of decisions that so many people are now forced to make. Lyse Doucet, thank you so much for joining us there live from Kyiv. Well, as time passes, it does feel like the Russian forces are stepping up the intensity of their bombardment and shelling across this country. And really, hitting key targets. Of course, we were reporting there on the nuclear power station, one of the buildings, the training facilities that was set on fire. That has now stabilized, as we were saying. But in the last few days, we've also seen the TV tower in Kyiv also hit and targeted. And as Lyse was saying, that convoy that is waiting just outside of the capital, almost like a threat, as people wait to see when it will actually arrive. And we've been reporting in the last few days that the movement on that convoy has been slow for various different reasons. But the big question now is, what path will this war take? Where will this war actually end up? Frank Gardner has the latest.
So here's the strategic picture in Ukraine on day 9 of this invasion. The areas in red, as you can see there, are the ones that Russian forces control. Still attacking Ukraine from 3 angles, from the north, the east and the south. Now the big news is that overnight, Russian forces, incredibly, have shelled the largest nuclear plant in the whole of Europe at a place called Zaporizhzhia, right here. And it started a fire, causing global outrage. It's been condemned by leaders all over the world as reckless, horrific, unacceptable. It's been called nuclear terror by the president of Ukraine. Mercifully, the fire is out. We're told there is no increased radiation. Russian forces are now in control of that plant. But it's not the only nuclear plant in the whole of Ukraine. There are other ones. You can see at Khmelnytskyi here, at Rivne, and up in Chernobyl, which Russian forces control, the plant that exploded in 1986. Now, most of the action, most of the fighting has been down in the south, down here, where Russian forces have burst out of Crimea, expanding eastwards, encircling the town of Mariupol, cutting off electricity, food, water, making an absolutely horrendous time for the residents there. There is a lot of fear and speculation in Ukraine that there's an amphibious assault about to be launched on Odessa. If they do that, Russia will be in control of pretty much the whole Black Sea coast, cutting off Ukraine from the sea.
Well, Frank Gardner reporting there. And let's just pick up on what Frank was saying there about fears of an amphibious assault, as he was saying. Well, there are also Russian troops heading towards the city of Kherson, and there's Russian troops permanently stationed in the Transnistria, an unrecognized breakaway area in Moldova, taken by Russian-backed separatists in 1992. So Odessa is preparing to be hit by all sides. Let's speak live now to the Deputy Mayor of Odessa, Sergei Tatyukhin. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on the programme. We're seeing what's happening in Mariupol and concerns there about a port city being hit. There are also now concerns about Odessa facing a similar fate. Just tell us what's happening there on the ground now.
Good afternoon. Now we have situation when all peoples in Ukraine united anti-aggression of Russia Federation. Now our neighbors give us chance to more good preparing for defense our city. We build protective structure. Our people put sand in bag, carry food, and we have reserved any essential things for our city. Now we have some nerve situation with rocket attack, with possibility of landing, but we understand that we own our land, and we will struggle with aggression with Putin's regime. Now we have united our inhabitants. Some people carry food, some people carry medicine and other goods for defense, for more good preparing if invite will be accident. So this situation we have in Odessa.
As the situation gets more dangerous, do you feel that you're prepared and you have enough supplies to defend your port city?
Yeah, we have port city, but we have some dangerous bay, and we have some warships near the bay. But they ships not come so close to the seashore because our military forces working by artillery and by the rocket. So they try to landing to our seashore, but not risk of this. We have some trying of landing, but all militaries of Russia was destroyed, and now we're waiting maybe other trying to landing. It's the main our problem. But we have a situation with Nikolaev city.
If Odessa is taken, just help our audiences understand. If Odessa is taken, just help our audiences understand the impact of that on Ukraine, because of course it is the largest port in the country.
Sorry, I very bad to hear you.
I wanted to know about the impact on the whole of Ukraine if the port of Odessa is taken by the Russians.
It's very dangerous because many ships have attacked from Russian war ships, and we now to create a new corridor, green corridor, and for convoy with humanitarians. Now we have general border with Romania, Orlovka-Isakcha checkpoint, and some checkpoints with Moldova. We try to give green corridor from this direction, not from the port, but port working, and we attract payloads, overloads for our defense.
Are people at the moment able to get safely out of the area?
I think not many people, our people not feeling healthy because we have air attention every 2 hours, and we have rocket strike by military object which placed on our territory. So people nervous, and some nervous situation continue, and we each minute, each hour waiting for bomb attack or rocket attack from the sea.
Just tell me what you would like to tell the international community. What kind of help and assistance do you need there in Odessa?
I want to say thank you, international communities, for supporting of Ukraine generally and Odessa too. Now we have many aid for different countries from our friends, for many cities of sisters. We have funds. We have some humanitarian convoy which go to Odessa. Now we're preparing and ready to receive any humanitarian aid for Odessa. And very grateful for all civilization of the world who support us in this difficult time. Thank you.
Sergei Tetyukhin, the Deputy Mayor of Odessa, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Well, as we've been reporting, more than 1 million people have managed to get out of the country, and tens of thousands of others are making their way to the various borders of Ukraine. Of course, the largest border is the Poland-Ukrainian border, with a 150-kilometre border that they share. But of course, there are other countries too, Moldova, Romania, Slovakia and Hungary, of course, as well, where so many people are trying to get out of the country to shield themselves from the fighting. Now, the refugees are crossing to neighbouring countries to the west, as I've said, such as Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova and Poland, which has so far seen the highest number of refugees. Now, let's just show you this map, which shows the extent of the exodus. The largest is the arrows that you're seeing, the greatest the number of people moving to that country. Now, let's speak to our Nick Thorpe, who joins us from Budapest, where refugees are arriving. And Nick, just give us a sense of the situation there in Hungary. Of course, I was just on the Poland-Ukraine border, where we're seeing a steady flow of people arriving into the country. But what's happening where you are?
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm standing now in one of the halls of this ancient Budapest West railway station. It was actually designed by Gustav Eiffel, but today it's a very different scene than one would normally see on a normal weekday in the station. Just behind me, a train's just arrived from the border, from Zahony, on the Ukrainian-Hungarian border. The place is thronging with refugees and Hungarians coming to help them here. Laid out on the tables here, you can see fruit, drinks, water, baby food, sandwiches being made up, all donated by the Hungarian public. There's been a huge outpouring of generosity here, as in, of course, all the other countries. Poland, as you mentioned, Romania, Moldova, Slovakia, all these countries now, the population, the local council, the charity organizations getting involved in this massive relief effort. Also a lot of translators here, a lot of volunteers. And just some of the people I've been talking to here today, we heard the report just before this from the Deputy Mayor of Odessa. This morning I've met the first family traveling here all the way to Hungary from Odessa. That's 1,300 kilometers away, but people coming from different cities in Ukraine as these Russian forces advance on those different fronts.
Yeah, devastating situation. And one of the other observations I had on the Poland-Ukraine border was it was majority women and children, having said goodbye to the men in their lives, because, of course, they're staying behind to fight. Are you seeing similar images there and scenes in Hungary?
Absolutely, it's almost all women and children. If one imagines that million people who've already left Ukraine, and if one thinks of it, it's actually not broadly spread across the population. It's women and children who've already left. Plus, of course, according to the International Organization for Migration, close to 500,000 foreigners were in Ukraine at the time of that war breaking out. So the only men among these refugee trains that are traveling here to Budapest from the border are, for example, students from different parts of the world. So they're the only males, as it were, on these trains.
Nick, thanks so much for that update there from Budapest. Well, as we've been reporting, Poland has been taking the highest number of asylum seekers and refugees, Ukrainians fleeing the fighting here. The Polish authorities say that over 600,000 people have now crossed the border into Poland seeking refuge, many of them not knowing when they will return, if they will ever be able to return to their country as the fighting and the shelling intensifies. And as we were reporting there, many of the men have been left behind because of martial law. They have to stay and fight, while majority women and children, mothers, grandmothers, sisters and daughters crossing the borders to Poland to get to safety. My colleague Kasia Madeira has the very latest from the Poland-Ukraine border.
This is Korchowa. This is just moments from the very border itself. And what we're seeing here time and time again, buses coming from the border with people who have just crossed over. And these are predominantly women and children and the elderly who have finally got to Poland after their own individual stories of trying to get across Ukraine to the Polish border itself. This is the first time that they're going to get something hot to eat, something hot to drink, warm up, reassess what it is that they're going to do next, because these people have literally just crossed the border and they are now in Poland, tired, bewildered and just exhausted with their trip so far. Poland has created a huge infrastructure to help these people because, of course, Poland has taken in the highest number of people coming over Ukraine. If you think about it, 1 million people displaced, leaving Ukraine in the space of just over a week. This is a staggering number of people. Ukraine nationals and non-nationals as well, because of the diverse community within Ukraine, the workers there, and also the student community there. Poland saying everybody is welcome, everybody can come here and seek safety. And the welcomes that they get, it's just been very, very heartwarming to see how the police force, how the fire brigade, how all the different firemen, how the whole host of volunteers are helping people. What we're hearing is people opening up their doors, opening up their homes, offering places for people to stay the night, people to rest, people to sleep. What is really staggering is that there are no large camps. There are places where people can just rest for a night or so, but there are no large camps. Homes are being opened up so that these people that have had a traumatic journey to get to safety can just have some rest. A very large number of Ukrainian nationals live in Poland, and they're here. Many, many family members are here to meet them. But there are also people who don't have anyone to join, don't have anywhere to go. And again, you see lots and lots of different people who come and who offer up their homes, a bedroom, a sofa. We're just hearing these stories time and time again. Every now and again, you hear a tannoy message saying that there's a driver who's come from Berlin. They want to take families to Berlin. We're hearing people come from the Netherlands, from the Czech Republic, from all over Europe, wanting to bring people onwards, because there is an understanding that within 8 days, within such a short space of time, 1 million people have left Ukraine and they've come to countries, neighbouring countries. Nearly 700,000 have just come to Poland alone, a staggering number of people. And given the volatility of the situation in Ukraine, given the uncertainty of the situation on the ground there, those numbers will rise. The European Union is talking about implementing a temporary protection directive so that people who are fleeing Ukraine, who are coming over from the border into the EU, that they can stay here, they can work here, they can access medical care here, they can access schools here, because there are children coming over that have been displaced, their worlds turned upside down. So the EU opening up its borders, and then the next step of their journey begins in places like this. This is one snapshot. This is Korczowa in East Poland, right on the border, and this is one of many places like this where these families are coming, where these individuals are coming, and they're working out what happens next, given the long journey that all of these people have already had. The EU opening its doors, Poland opening its doors, saying you will be safe here, you are welcome in this country.
Kasia Madeira reporting from the Poland-Ukraine border. Let's go back now to London and my colleague Geeta Gurumurthy, who will bring you up to date on some breaking news. Geeta, over to you.
Yelda, thank you. There, live in Lviv. We're just hearing the very sad news that the former Australian leg spinner Shane Warne has died suddenly. A legendary cricketer. He was only 52 years old, widely regarded as one of the greatest bowlers of all time, and known to many, many cricket fans and sports fans right around the world. There are already tributes. Gary Lineker here saying terribly saddened and shocked to hear the news that Shane Warne has died, the greatest spin bowler of all time. Can't quite believe it. Virender Sehwag also tweeting, cannot believe it, one of the greatest spinners, the man who made spin cool. Superstar Shane Warne is no more. Life is very fragile, but this is very difficult to fathom. Ollie Foster is at the BBC Sports Centre for us. This is absolutely shocking news, isn't it? He was so young.
It is absolutely shocking. By all accounts, he was found in his villa in Thailand in Koh Samui, and despite the best efforts of those around him to revive him, Shane Warne, Shane Keith Warne, one of the all-time greats in cricket, has died at the age of 52, a 15-year Test career with Australia, over 1,000 wickets across all formats of the game, 708 Test wickets, but he really did redefine the art of spin. His leg spin, many will remember the ball of the century against England, his first delivery in an Ashes Test against Mike Gatting at Old Trafford, and that really set him on his way, really, for superstardom. Shane Warne was absolute box office, and people came to watch him, how far he could rip that ball, taking wickets wherever he went. He was the record Test wicket taker for a while, but certainly he will go down as one of the true greats, truly charismatic as well. He went on to become a coach, fine broadcaster, in the commentary box as well, still actively involved in the game, as you say, at the age of just 52. This is going to shock cricket, but he transcended that sport, Geeta. It's going to shock sports fans across the world who will recognise a truly great sportsman, and Shane Warne was surely one of those.
Yes, I am the mother of two very intense cricket fans, and across India, across the subcontinent, right around the world, people will have been watching him because he was so well known. We're seeing pictures of him there with Elizabeth Hurley, who he dated for a while. But he also had a family, he had children. But he became very well known even after playing cricket in terms of his amazing television career, because he was an amazing communicator, wasn't he?
I mean, we just saw the pictures of him with Liz Hurley. We mentioned he was box office on the pitch. He was also no stranger to the front pages as well as the back pages. Various scandals sort of dogged him wherever he went. There was a year's ban for taking a banned diuretic. He was penalised for accepting money from a bookmaker for giving tips on the weather. There were various infidelities, but it just added to his persona as this person who just represented a box office cricket player of the ages, and he was untouchable when it came to what he could do with a cricket ball. You mentioned some of those tributes that will be pouring in for hours and days now. Shoaib Akhtar, the former Pakistan fast bowler, the two of those will have come up against each other. Just heard the devastating news about legendary Shane Warne passing away. No words to describe how shocked and sad I am. What a legend, what a man, what a cricketer. The official Barmy Army, the England Supporters Club, rest in peace, Shane Warne, one of the game's best characters and finest bowlers, and the tributes will go on. The Australian cricket team are in Pakistan at the moment, and very sadly they have been mourning the passing of another Australian great, the former wicketkeeper Rodney Marsh, in the last 24 hours. He passed away in his early 70s, so really devastating news for Australian cricket. But Shane Warne, this will shock not just cricket fans, Australian cricket, but sports fans across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one more tribute I just wanted to read you. Jemima Goldsmith, of course, who was married to Imran Khan, the Pakistani cricket captain, now leader of Pakistan, saying devastating, shocking news about Shane Warne, a sporting hero for so many, including my sons, and a giant-hearted friend because he was only 52 years old. Incredibly charismatic figure on and off the cricket field. We will, of course, bring you more on that news, but we just wanted to update you amidst the very difficult global news that we're hearing of this one very tragic loss. Let us go back now to Ukraine, and my colleague Yelda Hakim is live for us in Lviv. Let's bring you the very latest there from that city, just on the west of the country of Ukraine.
Geeta, thank you so much. And just bringing you back here to the situation in Ukraine and the ongoing conflict. And as we've been reporting, tens of thousands of people have been fleeing the fighting in the north, the east and the south of the country and making their way here to relative safety of Western Ukraine and the city of Lviv. We can now speak to John Smurhan, who's the Director of Humanitarian Assistance at the Ukrainian Education Platform, to give us a sense of the humanitarian assistance that's being provided to so many here. John, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Just give us a little bit more of a sense of what you guys do.
Yes, the Ukrainian Education Platform is we are providing assistance to internally displaced people that are escaping the conflict areas. We don't want refugees. We want internally displaced people. These mostly women and children. I'm sure they want to be closer to their loved ones. All the men are signing up to go fight. So our objective is to keep them here. We supply the areas. We work with the municipal authorities so that they, we cooperate with them so that they can help.
But you're getting such an influx of people coming here to Lviv and to the west, fleeing the fighting.
Yes.
How much pressure are you facing now?
We're facing a lot of pressure. We see the influx. We are requesting donations, which we are getting. But the flow rate is very high for us, so we're requesting more and more donations to come in so that we can supply food, medical supplies, bedding, mattresses, other materials for these families to have a home.
You say you don't want people to become refugees and leave the country. You'd rather they be internally displaced. Just help us understand why it is more favourable to have people stay in the country.
Well, we believe that if we provide proper living conditions for them, they will stay. They will be able to help rebuild this country when this whole conflict is over. So we want them close because being a refugee is not a good thing. That's a very difficult thing, especially when the women flee with their children, but the men have to stay.
That has been incredibly difficult to see, and we witnessed that on the Poland-Ukrainian border. Families being torn apart.
Yes, no, absolutely, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that they stay and they're protected. And by the way, with this new nuclear issue that we're seeing in Zaporizhia, we anticipate that we'll see more people flooding into this area and trying to leave the country. So our communications efforts have stepped up so that people know they have a safe place where they can stay here in the western part of the country.
Have you been able to offer support or assistance to people in the east or the south of the country? We spoke to the deputy mayor of Odessa, for example, and they were talking about the humanitarian crisis they're facing there. Of course, we're seeing the situation in Mariupol and various other places in the south and the east.
Yes, we have 9 points, distribution points, and 300 volunteers that are working in those areas. So the food deliveries that we're getting, for example, are going straight to Kyiv and will be going to Odessa as well. So we're very much focused on those people who are not able to leave the conflict areas, people like older people or even orphans, to make sure that they're properly supplied.
In the last 24 hours, Ukraine and Russia agreed to humanitarian corridors. Is that something that you've been able to take advantage of?
We're just seeing that taking place. It doesn't happen right away. But yes, absolutely, that gives a chance for us to get those people out, for those people to come out much more easily. But the problem is there are a lot of people that can't move, okay? And they need assistance as well. So it's, we're helping them coming out, but we also have to help them when they're unable to leave.
And frankly, there are also a lot of elderly people who don't want to leave their homes, who are saying, well, we'll risk it and stay.
Yes, yeah, there certainly are. And they don't want to. Ukrainians are fiercely defending their homes and their land. There are a lot of older people that are very patriotic and don't want to go as well. So yes, absolutely.
John Smurhan, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
That was John Smurhan, Director of Humanitarian Assistance at the Ukrainian Education Platform. Let's now go to Patricia Lewis, who can tell us more about the developments that we've seen in the last 24 hours. We saw intense shelling of that nuclear power plant in the south of the country, and there has been international condemnation and concerns about what that means for the international community, the region, and this new form of warfare, because of course we heard President Zelensky say that this is a form of nuclear terror. Dr. Patricia Lewis, she's a nuclear physicist and arms control expert. She leads the International Security Program at Chatham House in London. She joins us live now. Dr. Lewis, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Just tell us about the risks involved in what we saw transpire overnight, because of course we know that the reactor is at normal levels and things have been stabilized, but this is still a very dangerous situation.
Yes, indeed it is. I mean, I think that this is an unprecedented situation. There have been great fears about these sorts of things happening over many years. During the Cold War, it was one of the scenarios that was definitely discussed. Later on, after 9/11, the spent fuel ponds were mostly reinforced with covers, etc., in ways that they perhaps hadn't been before. And there were reinforcements of the protection containment facilities for the reactors. And so they have been designed mostly to withstand a plane crash, but to withstand a missile attack, we're not entirely sure how that would work. Not clear either as to whether or not this was a deliberate attack on the nuclear installation or an accidental attack, a stray projectile having hit one of the training facilities, thank goodness, and not one of the radioactive, not one of the facilities that has radioactive material in it.
Is there concern that this is sort of a tactic of warfare to almost have the Ukrainian side bend to the will of the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think almost everything that's going on is exactly for that reason. So it's to instill fear. The idea of a radioactive incident, it wouldn't be like a nuclear bomb, it wouldn't be anywhere near as bad as that, but it would still instill a lot of fear in the local population, and there would be grave concern about whether or not there would be any radioactive material that would be taken across the borders through the weather systems, etc. So the idea is clearly to instill some fear. And I think as well, President Putin may be wanting to make the link, the nuclear link, and reinforce it with, his nuclear weapons threat, his saying that, that he has to prevent Ukraine getting nuclear weapons. Because this has been a constant theme, and Mr. Lavrov said it recently as well. So there's this linkage with the nuclear issue that's going on in President Putin's whole approach in Ukraine at the moment.
And Dr. Lewis, we know that there are 4 other nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Of course, this one was the largest in Ukraine and also the largest in Europe. But how concerned are you and others about those other nuclear power plants as well being targeted or hit? And again, as you say, we don't know if it was deliberate or not, but there's certainly fighting in the area that took place around the one in the southeast.
Yes, indeed. And they took Chernobyl, they've taken this. It's likely, I think, that they're going to take the rest. Probably what they'll say is that they're securing the facilities, they're making sure that, in the mayhem of war, that nuclear material isn't taken, isn't stolen. Of course, the Ukrainian officials and experts are maintaining the facilities superbly without that. But that's probably what they will say. So my guess is that they will be going after other nuclear power stations as well. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, spoke today and said that he is willing to go to Ukraine. He said actually to Chernobyl, and to offer himself in person to negotiate the rules of the road to make sure that all of these reactors stay safe from attack. And it was an extraordinary offer to make, and it's a really important move on his behalf.
Dr. Patricia Lewis, thank you so much for your analysis and for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you very much indeed.
Now, in the last hour, we've heard from the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, and he has said that Russia will be paying a very high price for this ongoing crisis, conflict and invasion of Ukraine. As I said, he's been speaking in the last hour, and our diplomatic correspondent, James Landell, asked him some questions. Have a listen.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what sort of options were considered about helping countries like Georgia and Bosnia? Secondly, can you tell us a little bit more about whether NATO allies discussed what more military support could be provided for Ukraine? And thirdly, was the issue of no-fly zones even discussed at this morning's meetings? Thank you.
NATO has provided support, and NATO allies have provided support to Georgia, to Bosnia and Herzegovina and other partners for many years. We helped them with capacity building, reforms, strengthening their defence and security institutions. So we also have a training centre in Georgia. We also have common exercises. And of course we have different kinds of activities with different countries, different partners. We didn't make any final decisions, but it's a broad agreement that we need to do more to support these countries. And this is partly about scaling up things we already do on strengthening the defence and the security institutions, reforms, training, but also potentially adding more activities in support of these countries. Because what you have seen with Ukraine is that they may be at risk, exposed for even more intervention, subversion and potentially even attacks by the Russian armed forces or the Russian Federation. NATO allies provide support to Ukraine. I think we have to remember that allies have provided support to Ukraine for many years, and now they're stepping up different types of Ukraine of support, and this is crucial in this critical time for Ukraine. On a no-fly zone, it was mentioned at the same time. Allies agree that we should not have NATO planes operating over Ukrainian airspace or NATO troops on Ukrainian territory.
Where are they? Okay, you're listening there to Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. Let's go live now to Brussels and hear from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who's also speaking alongside the EU Foreign Minister Chief, Joseph Borrell. Have a listen.
First resort. Virtually everything that we're trying to do around the world that's affecting the lives of our citizens, we're more effective when we're doing it together. And we've spent the last year actually making good on that commitment. And it's, I think, very, very instructive that now in a time of crisis, the investment that both of us have made in this relationship is proving how important it is, how vital it is. What the European Union has done over the space of a couple of weeks is quite simply remarkable. The speed with which it acted, the actions that it took, both with regard to the sanctions and also support for Ukraine, are, I think it's not an exaggeration to say, historic. And it only further validates for us the importance of this partnership. As Joseph said, we are faced together with what is President Putin's war of choice, unprovoked, unjustified, and a war that is having horrific, horrific consequences for real people, for mothers, for fathers, for children. We see the images on TV, and it has to stop. We're committed to doing everything we can to make it stop. So the coordination between us is vital, but of course it's beyond the United States and Europe. This is an aggression, a challenge, a threat that is relevant to the entire world, because what's at risk, first and foremost, are literally the lives of Ukrainian men, women, and children. But beyond that, the very fundamental principles that we've established together after 2 world wars that are so important to keeping peace and security for everyone. Principles that President Putin is egregiously violating every single day. The notion that one country can't simply go in and change the borders of another by force or take it over. The principle that one country can't dictate to another the choices that its citizens would make about their future. The principle that we're past the time of spheres of influence where one country subjugates its neighbors to its will. All of those things are at stake, and if we allow those principles to be challenged, as Putin is doing now, with impunity, that will open a Pandora's box of trouble for not just us, but quite frankly for the entire world. So the stakes are high, but because we're doing this together, I'm very confident that we'll succeed. I have to say, finally, the 2 of us have been working like this for many, many months. And that collaboration, that partnership, that friendship is also what makes a difference, and I'm really grateful for it. Thank you.
Why no fly zone? Why no fly zone?
What's your message to the people of Ukraine? You were listening there to the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking at that NATO foreign ministers meeting where all the NATO foreign ministers have gathered, and he spoke about this unprovoked attack on Ukraine and the importance of the unity of the alliance. Let's go straight to our Brussels correspondent Jessica Parker, who can bring us more. And Jessica, these are defiant words, but we've heard them before from Antony Blinken.
Yeah, so I think you're hearing a number of sentiments re-emphasised today, if you like. So calls from Western leaders for Putin to cease his activities in Ukraine and withdraw. So they're calling for the war to be stopped. Again, reiterating that NATO, this defensive military alliance of 30 countries that does not include Ukraine, is not going to get involved with trying to enforce any kind of no-fly zone because of fears that the war could escalate even further if they did so. But what you've got today is a number of meetings. So you've got NATO that's happened, G7, EU foreign ministers are meeting just over the road from where I am now this afternoon, including with Antony Blinken, including with Liz Truss, the UK Foreign Secretary. The first time a UK Foreign Secretary has been to one of these types of meetings, by the way, since Brexit. And I think a couple of things are going on. They are taking stock after a week where so much has happened. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, major realignments in European foreign and defence policy as well, a huge wave of sanctions, not least of all from the European Union, which we were just hearing there, has acted faster, I think, than many expected. But of course, the war goes on, Russian troops are still in Ukraine, and there are conversations, as well as taking stock, as well as trying to show unity of what to do next. Having said that, at the moment, although things have changed very quickly in the last week, we're not expecting any major decisions today. We didn't get that from the press conference with Jens Stoltenberg earlier. We're not necessarily expecting that from EU foreign ministers either, but there are so many issues on the table about what more the West can do to help Ukraine, about any possible further sanctions, and about, of course, European energy supplies, 40% of natural gas to the EU coming from Russia.
Yeah, and Jessica, in the last 24 hours, we've heard President Zelensky again call for a no-fly zone, saying that now we're seeing a nuclear terror taking place after that nuclear power plant was shelled by Russian forces. Now, of course, we have to reiterate, we don't know if that was hit deliberately or it was an accident. But either way, President Zelensky still trying to put pressure on the international community, on NATO, to do more, to step up to assist his country.
Yeah, so as you say, those calls for a no-fly zone, no indication, as we mentioned, that NATO would go there, warning that it could just lead to a huge escalation in the war, pulling in other countries, very much emphasising at the moment that they are a defensive alliance, Ukraine not a member of NATO. But I think you are going to see continued calls from Ukraine's leaders for the West to do more, including on sanctions. So I mentioned that EU Foreign Affairs ministers meeting. The Foreign Affairs Minister for Ukraine is dialing in as well. One would expect he will again try and get the West to put in place more sanctions. And I mentioned energy. So one of the things that's being discussed is what does Europe do about its dependence on Russian energy, because there is great frustration, not least of all from, for example, the Prime Minister of Poland, who's voiced this, because they are, I think, particularly robust on this issue. They're saying that Europe is effectively buying energy from Russia. That's putting money into President Putin's coffers. He's using that money to carry out this attack on Ukraine. But, of course, can the EU realistically start switching off supplies from Russia in order to deprive President Putin of funds? They are desperately trying to find other energy sources. So they're talking to America about boosting supplies of liquid natural gas. They're also looking to other countries as well. There have been visits to Qatar and various countries as they try and find other sources of energy going forward. But this is not clearly something you can do overnight.
Jessica, our viewers were just seeing some live pictures of Jens Stoltenberg at that meeting, the NATO Secretary General. And this really is an attempt to show unity with NATO, with the foreign ministers of NATO coming together, trying to show some kind of united front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people look back at what has happened over the last week and the sanctions that have been agreed, which are unprecedented, and think that the West has pulled together a lot, given that there have previously been, divisions. And that's not to say that there haven't been some disagreements along the way about what sanctions should look like. But I think here in Brussels, the EU certainly feels they've moved very quickly. But as I say, a big question now will be, as this war carries on, what more can they do?
Jessica, thanks so much for that upsum of the situation there in Brussels with that NATO foreign ministers meeting. And we heard there earlier from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who was reinforcing NATO and the international community's support for Ukraine's right to defend itself, to defend its sovereignty. And they said they will do whatever they can. But of course, the idea of a no-fly zone not on the table, or troops on the ground here, NATO troops. We'll be following the developments here on BBC News throughout the day. Over to Ty now for all the latest business news.